Hi, my name is Nick Benoit. I am the writer and director on Runaway, which is based on Jesus' parable on the prodigal son from Luke chapter 15. It's a story that, I think it's one of the first stories I remember from the Bible. I remember sitting in church, I had this Bible that had pictures in it, and when I was flipping through the Bible in the middle of a frankly boring sermon, I was either looking for pictures or I was looking for stories. And the prodigal son was one of those stories that I remember coming across even when I was little and being fascinated by, because it was one of those instances where I could, even as a kid, I could understand where I fit into the metaphor of that story. It was a story that from the very beginning of my life, I think, was instructing me. And so it's always had a special place for me. The prodigal son story is one I've always identified with, but primarily as the prodigal. I think a lot of us have that experience of running away from something that might be the best thing in our lives. I think all of us can identify with that. But one of the things that became really fascinating when we started thinking about telling this story was, what if that wasn't the only perspective we looked at this from? I was probably in my 20s before I heard the first pastor teach on any of the other characters in the story. We call it the prodigal son story, but the truth is there's a father, there's a brother that are main characters in this story too, that have arcs of their own that are fascinating and that we have so much to learn from. And it just felt like kind of unmined material. In our version of Runaway, our version of the prodigal son story, there's three perspectives. There's the kid who does the running away. There's his brother who stays put and is responsible and seems to do everything right. And then there's, in our version of the story, there's a mother who just loves them both like crazy. And I think anytime that you want to step into the shoes of another person, or if you want to even be invited to think outside your own perspective, story is such a great way to do that. Because I think a lot of times story invites us into an experience that might feel foreign at first, but once we get in there, we realize, oh, I totally identify with this. And I think that was our experience even while making this. Like I said, I think so many of us, we identify with the prodigal, but throughout telling the story, we realized, gosh, we are all three of these main characters at different times in our lives. This version, our version of the prodigal son story, started from a biographical story of my own about getting fed up with the injustices I felt like were in my home, which really weren't all that bad, and deciding to run away with a backpack full of graham crackers and pudding cups. And that part of the story is kind of funny, and I think a lot of us have that kind of story. But what I realized, I didn't really realize it till later in life, that the real unique part of my story was in coming home. I am lucky enough to have two parents who, in so many ways, were models for me of what it looks like to love with the love of our Heavenly Father. And so this story started out as a very personal one, and it's still based on that experience. But at the same time, it was so much fun to step outside of that. Writing the same story from three different perspectives and trying to make those directorial choices about what do you leave in and what do you leave out? How does this person perceive an event or not have the whole story? And how does that change their outlook? And even what are the stories we tell ourselves that we're constantly looking for confirmation of rather than for the real story? So practically, trying to tell a story in three parts, same events from different perspectives, was really challenging. But even more than that, it was an incredibly emotional experience for me. My version of events, of running away and the injustices I felt I was experiencing, I'm familiar with that story. But when I sat down and started to imagine what life might have been like from the perspective of my brother or from the perspective of my mother, to try to get into, now again, the version of the story that we tell in this isn't all autobiographical. It is not based on my brother's or my mom's experience necessarily, but at the same time, like, I did have to get in a different headspace. I did have to start examining what does life look like from my brother, who in so many versions of my life story can be a friend or a villain or any other label that I'll put on him, but to step into his perspective and to see some of the things that maybe he was fighting for, and the ways in our lives where I think there were times when I could steal the lion's share of attention, and what that must have felt like for him. To step into that perspective was really eye-opening and really empathy building for me. But then also to step into the perspective of my mom and to see what a challenge it must have been to raise two boys, but also just to love with a love that is that fierce. It helped me to see the very real relationships in my life in new ways. Yeah, I think any time that you really intentionally put yourself into someone else's experience, take a walk in their shoes, there becomes very little, I think, that can actually divide you. When you're able to see through their eyes and to feel things along with them, you begin to believe the best about things rather than the stories that you sometimes tell yourself. Is there a better way to step into the experience of another person? Because you get to feel along with them and see along with them and experience along with them. And I feel like stories are just a secret key that unlocks a secret closet that lets you step into experiences that once felt foreign and suddenly feel so close.